Some lady is angry with me on Instagram. The reason is a meme suggesting that while the far left here in Spain has recently suggested giving every 18-year-old 20,000 euros, they're forgetting to help business owners and workers and haven't even mentioned the self-employed autónomos in their program. I shared it in the run-up to the general election, which finally took place yesterday, July 23rd, 2023. And it's a meme, sort of a joke, barely even a political statement. Really, I meant it as a comment on Spanish politics in general. We've got several parties all specializing in different sorts of issues, but making life easier for small businesses and the self-employed doesn't seem to be on anybody's radar. It's not even talked about as a political issue. However, over on Instagram, some lady lost it and declared she couldn't bring herself to listen to my podcast or buy my books if I was going to keep talking about my political opinions. Well, okay, some lady. I guess she's probably offended by anyone who dares to question the far left subsidize everyone except business because business is evil dogma. That's pretty common around here. Anyway, I blocked her. Haters gonna hate, and I'm just a lowly, non-voting immigrant who's not represented by any political party in Spain. Sad. But as a busy third-class citizen, I've got things to do other than coddle her feelings. Hey everybody, it's Daniel, and welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain, except receiving large government subsidies, of course. This is episode 46. We're going to talk about the election results from yesterday, the results which are not really results quite yet. But first, a little bit about Spain's work and business or anti-business culture. Why doesn't anyone want to be autónomo in Spain? Well, a few years ago, I wrote an article about working in Spain. It's here on the podcast as well, where I talked about some of Morena's co-workers sitting around at the office hoping to be fired so they could live off their severance package for months or years and not have to find a new job. It's not polite to talk about, but it's just one aspect of Spanish work culture. The contracts that make it hard to fire people who have been around for a while, even if they're useless or incompetent. In other words, it's another example of well-meaning laws intended to protect workers' rights that are later exploited by an unscrupulous and lazy few. If you're self-employed, of course, you have no such options. You work, you pay taxes, and hopefully you keep your head above water so you can continue working and paying taxes next year. You have to sign up to be autónomo for any kind of self-employment, no matter how tenuous, and pay into Social Security every month whether or not you're making any money. All of which leads most Spanish people to think, quite rightly, that being autónomo is not a very good deal. Just getting all the papers in order to start working for yourself can be a complex process. And remember, you're officially supposed to do all this before you've earned your first euro. No wonder most Spaniards dream of becoming civil servants, o sea, funcionarios. Why don't Spaniards want to work in the private sector? Here's a little story. Years ago, many years ago, I was with some old-school Spanish friends up in Cantabria, the cool, green, northern region you should totally visit when you have the chance. We were visiting some caves in the area, so we had to buy tickets from a guy in a little glass booth. The ticket guy was reading a book of poetry between customers. It wasn't a very busy cave, and my friends struck up a conversation with him. He seemed friendly and very intelligent, but my comment was, what a terrible job, sitting in that little booth all day, just doing one thing. Oh no, my friends corrected me. That's a really good job. Steady salary, work from 9 to 3, government always pays on the first of the month, and afterwards you can go home and have a life. I wasn't seeing it, but a lot of Spanish people seem to agree. Better to work for the government and have a bad salary every month and a job where you can't get fired than to work in the private sector. Looking at the numbers, they're probably right. The private sector jobs here in Spain often pay pretty badly. A lot of people have permanent contracts where they're close to unfireable, but many don't. There are also temporary contracts where you can be fired with little notice or severance pay, and seasonal contracts where you're expected to be on unemployment benefits for part of every year. Finally, the working hours in the private sector tend to be much longer. The culture of presentismo that I've mentioned elsewhere tends to value people who put in long hours, whether or not they actually get anything done. All of this leads many of Spain's brightest and best to prefer to become funcionarios, like the guy in the ticket booth outside that cave many years ago. Getting a government job means you don't have any of those problems I just mentioned. Plus, your parents will probably approve and support you while you prepare. And even more than that, as a funcionario, you're basically unfireable as long as you don't do anything that blatantly subverts the Constitution. There are even cases of funcionarios out there who don't show up to work for 10 years or more and still get paid. Vaya. The main downside to becoming a funcionario is that you have to take a civil service exam, known in Spanish as oposiciones. These are allegedly very difficult tests, and many people take several years of study and various attempts to pass them. And they're for any kind of government worker. Public school teacher, mail carrier, bus driver, all have to take the oposiciones. Looking at the salaries online, I can see the appeal of this sort of job. It's not very glamorous, but apparently a bus driver for the EMT in Madrid earns almost 37,000 euros per year, which in Spain at least is a pretty good salary. To give you some context, when I was an English teacher working at various language schools back in the day, I doubt I ever made more than 13,000 a year. That takes into account some seasonality, no work at all from July to mid-September. Plus, I was illegal or semi-legal at the time. But still, Spanish private sector salaries can be pretty bad, even for Spaniards. So, if you're a young Spanish person finishing up your degree, a life in government work doesn't exactly seem like a bad option. Your parents will probably support you. You can live at home as long as you want, study 12 hours a day for the oposiciones. It'll all pay off eventually when you get your first job and can finally move out of your mom's house and into a rent-controlled flat at age 30. I'm not exaggerating about that last bit. Those are statistics. You can Google it. Anyway, I'm sure I'll get some hate for this large generalization, but a lot of Spanish people aren't really encouraged to have huge ambitions. Most people aren't walking around talking about their six-figure consulting jobs. Becoming a doctor or a lawyer is still desirable because of the status, but not particularly well paid compared to wealthier countries. On the other hand, there's a greater respect for people with regular jobs than we tend to have back in the US. A lot of regular jobs actually pay pretty well compared to the national average. And autónomos, incidentally, often do much worse than regular jobs. According to the data I've seen, about 2/3 of self-employed people in Spain make less than the minimum wage. As usual, the caveat is that there's a lot of underground economy that's impossible to calculate, But, evil capitalist that I am, I'd like to insist that if taxes were lower and paperwork less onerous, there would be less money changing hands in under-the-table payments as well. All this without even mentioning that I've had multiple landlords refuse to rent to me because I'm autonomo, and the general stigma of being basically unemployed to most members of polite society, and, well, I get a bit annoyed about the whole thing. Have fun at the office, though. Let's get to the election results. The general election, like I said, was yesterday, and there is no clear winner yet. The center-right Popular Party got the most votes, but even in coalition with far-right Vox, they don't have a majority. The current coalition between the Socialist Party, the center-left PSOE, and Sumar, that's this week's coalition of leftist groups, has fewer votes than the right-wing bloc, but may be able to keep governing, depending on who votes and who abstains when they open the new session of Parliament and try to form a new government. This is all a bit unexpected. As recently as a week ago, it was assumed that Pedro Sanchez was going to be out and would have a right-wing majority with the PP and Vox running things. That PP acronym is a bit unfortunate in English, whatever. Partido Popular. Anyway, that did not happen, and at this point it looks possible that we'll have a few more years of Sanchez and his cronies. Unfortunately, it looks like the Catalan independence parties are going to be the swing votes who get to decide who governs. La Vanguardia newspaper up here in Catalonia is basically declaring the whole thing to be a victory for Carles Puigdemont, the leader of Junts who fled to Belgium several years ago after sorta kinda declaring independence from Spain back in 2017. The suddenly essential Catalan parties are asking for amnesty for their crimes against the Spanish Constitution as well as self-determination as conditions for their help, and this is even taking into consideration that the independence parties have lost a lot of votes over the past several years as people move on to other more pressing issues. I am really hoping not to have to write a follow-up here when we try to figure out what self-determination means to these people. Anyway, the Spanish political adventure continues. Somebody told me years ago that all Spanish elections were the same. No matter what the result, everyone declares victory. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I've been watching since then, and it turns out she's mostly right. This time the Catalans won, even though they lost. Sumar is claiming that they changed the tone of the whole campaign. Helping to hold off the far right is a victory, even though they lost. The socialists might still be able to govern, even though they lost. The party that actually won, the PP, didn't get the result they expected, but I guess they also have some chance of governing, although basically they lost. Being the most voted party doesn't help you, unless you have an absolute majority or can form a coalition that does. All this to say, politics is lame. I've probably said that before, though. Oh well, here's looking at another few years of Pedro Sanchez. Guess I'd better go earn some money. I've got 17 tax bills a year to pay over here, and they're only getting bigger. That's all I've got for today. I hope you're doing well, wherever you are. Feel free to subsidize this podcast. Yolanda Diaz and other leftist politicians will not be subsidizing my podcast, but you could. You could go to expatmadrid.com/donate. Send me some money for a virtual coffee. You could send me some money for 100 virtual coffees. Whatever works for you. If you want to go to Amazon and buy some of my books, you can do that also. My name is Daniel Welsh. You can look me up. I've got a lot of books that will help your Spanish-speaking friends to learn English. They have excellent reviews over there. You can also support this podcast by giving me a like on whatever platform or a review. Leave me some stars if you are on Spotify, etc. Subscribe, you know the drill. I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, from beautiful Barcelona, hasta la próxima. Bye.